Do you want to learn a practical study framework you can use right now to get top grades in your exams using Active Recall? In today's video in my evidence-based learning series, I break down the exact system that I used when coming top in medicine and surgery exams and show you how to create your own study questions and test yourself using a technique known as the Question Recall framework so that you can get top grades too. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name's Alex. I'm a surgeon and founder of a few edtech companies. And on this channel, we focus on learning and human performance to help you live healthier, wealthier, happier, and more productive lives. Now, while highlighting, reading, and making colourful notes can seem productive and fill time, it's definitely not the most efficient or effective way to learn according to the research. So I'm going to show you the specific strategy I used for creating Active Recall questions to test myself and consistently score top grades in exams with limited studying time while working full-time as a surgeon. In this video, you'll first learn about how the Question Recall framework works and the evidence behind it. Then I'll go into practical detail to show you how I used it to study for exams. We'll cover how I turned my notes and lectures into Active Recall questions, how I tested myself, and how I filled in any knowledge gaps. I'll be screen sharing some of the actual notes and questions I used, and we'll be giving you some hacks you can use to apply the method yourself to subjects beyond medicine at the end of the video. So be sure to stick around and do hit subscribe to get notified about more videos in the evidence-based learning series. So what is the Question Recall framework? Well, it's a purely question-based active recall method that is all about converting your existing course materials into questions you can practice in your own time to help you study more efficiently and get top grades by using evidence-based methods like active recall and spaced repetition. Essentially, it's a system where instead of writing notes or trying to summarize content from lectures or textbooks, you instead write lots of questions, and then when you come to study for your exams, you go over those questions at spaced intervals. After a few spacing intervals, you'll likely start to know things pretty well. So what does this look like practically? Well, let's jump into my laptop. Well, the framework involves first creating questions from your lecture notes, course syllabus, or textbooks, and then you add the questions to your spaced study schedule and test yourself, and then you identify knowledge gaps through testing and go back to your notes or use other resources to consolidate your learning. The majority of the information that you need to learn for exams will be in your lecture notes, handouts, textbooks, or PowerPoint slides. And as we know from this evidence-based learning series, simply rereading or highlighting or even summarizing these resources isn't an effective way to learn. Studies like Dunlosky et al. In 2013 have proven that active recall and testing yourself with questions is a far more efficient and effective way to learn, and spacing out your testing sessions will help you to remember information for longer and avoid the effects of the forgetting curve, which was identified by Ebbinghaus way back in the 1880s. If you want to learn more about the science behind active recall and spaced repetition, check out my earlier videos in the learning series, as we're now going to look in practical detail at how they can be used to study for exams and get you top grades consistently. So when I was studying for medicine and then when I was studying for surgical exams around my day job as an orthopedic surgeon, I was obsessed with being efficient with my time. When I was in my first year of medical school, I failed an exam because I just read over lecture notes, highlighting things, and didn't really test myself as no one had taught me how to actually study. I then started structuring my exam preparation, blocking out a few weeks at the start of any revision period to create questions when my friends were summarizing or rereading their notes. I'd also actually create questions during lectures without taking notes, and I have a video on why I took no notes at all in med school coming after this video, so be sure to hit subscribe if you want to hear about that first. Now, this question creation method can be used for any subject, not just medicine and science. And how you create your questions and where you store and organize them is entirely up to you. For me, I used Evernote for my medical finals and surgical exam revision by creating a notebook called Medical Finals Revision and then creating cards for each topic area, such as cardiology. You can equally use a Word document, Notion, or any other note-taking system that's easy for you. I then organized each note with a heading that matched the lecture notes, textbook, or PowerPoint I was creating questions from, and then added the questions. At the end of this video, I'll look at how you can adapt the system for subjects like maths and physics, which use calculations and equations, so make sure to stick around. How the heck do you even write questions from notes and textbooks? Well, let's jump into that right now. Creating questions can seem pretty intimidating at first, but once you know how to do it and have a system, it's actually really quick to do. And it's as quick or quicker than rereading, summarizing, or taking notes, which we know are inferior learning methods. To see how I create questions, let's first take a look at some source material against my questions by hopping again into my laptop. As you can see, most of the lecture handouts or textbooks have information and facts organized by topic, and for medicine, This was then broken down by things like causes of a condition, symptoms, how to treat it, and so forth. There was also deeper knowledge around physiology, pharmacology, and things like why and how drugs work, or the anatomy of the heart. The first thing I do is to organise my note or Word document with headings for the topic areas in a logical structure that matches the source material or exam syllabus, so I can quickly jump to sections when I want to learn. When creating the questions, I'll have the lecture notes or source material on one side of my screen and then Evernote or Word on the other. I'll then read through the source material, thinking about how I can turn any facts into a question. I'll also be thinking about anything that's mentioned in the text, video, or whatever the source material is that I don't know or that I'm not sure about. And I'll create questions from that too. So for example, if we're creating questions on the physiology of the adrenal gland, like I did in my surgical exams, and there's a fact like the cortex is divided into 3 sections, then immediately I'm thinking I can add questions like, what is the adrenal cortex? How is the adrenal cortex divided? Or even just, what is the structure of the adrenal gland? To help focus your questions and create better questions, you need to make sure that the questions you create are both useful and relevant. To help make them useful and relevant, I'd suggest 2 hacks. First, start by looking at past papers or speak with successful students to get an idea of the difficulty of the exam and the depth expected of your answers. Secondly, go through the syllabus and make sure you know everything that might come up. This will give you a quick top-level overview and will help you to organise and prioritise your questions and ensure that they are useful and relevant to what you're learning. Lectures and slides may sometimes go off topic, and you don't want to be testing or wasting time on any areas of the syllabus that aren't high yield or which you already know well and are very basic. My personal focus at this stage is to just create as many questions as possible. You don't need to be a perfectionist and create hyper-specific questions, just a few per slide or topic area that cover the main points that are commonly assessed. I don't add in any answers or get distracted or go off topic, and I focus on high-yield sections I know have come up before in past papers or are highlighted by the syllabus. I set myself a challenge of converting all the source materials into questions, and will usually try and convert a chapter or lecture in a few Pomodoro intervals. The process of creating the questions helps to stimulate some elements of active recall as I'm thinking how well I know topics as I create the questions. And the first time I did it, the challenge of creating the questions and having a goal was actually much more enjoyable than just reading or highlighting, and it helped me to focus and probably absorb more information on my first pass of reviewing the lecture notes than if I was reviewing them otherwise. In the examples you saw, it took me the same time as reading and taking notes or reading and highlighting to create the exact questions. For topics like medical conditions, where lots of the facts are grouped into common sections such as causes of a disease, symptoms, treatment, and complications, a helpful hack here to speed up creating your questions is to use a common question stem, like what are the causes of, and then copy and paste a block of common questions and add in the specific disease or condition at the end to save time. You can apply this to anything with a common structure, from French vocab to origins and insertions of muscles in anatomy. You can also be creative in adding questions like draw the structure of the heart, or say out loud the French for where is the library. But try and stay focused and don't overcomplicate things, as you just want to get through as many questions as possible, and remember you can always come back to add in more later, which we'll touch on in the section on how to fill in the gaps in your knowledge. Once you've spent time creating your questions, it's then time to test yourself. Just like in my video on how to study for exams, it's a good idea to plan out your study sessions around topic areas and use spaced repetition intervals to revisit, so you don't forget what you've learned due to the forgetting curve. When it comes to testing yourself, the way that I did it was that I would go through each question in a structured approach. I'd first look at a question and try and recall in my head the answer and see how well I knew the answer without writing anything down at all. I might then try and write something down to assess the level of detail that I knew. If a question completely stumped me or it was obvious that I didn't know it, I'll highlight this in red, as you can see in the questions list. This was helpful as when it got close to the exams, I might quickly skim over my list of questions and self-test in my head to save time. And then I could also focus on the questions in red, which I'd found the hardest. When testing, in addition to my self-created notes, I also used past papers, question banks, and peer-reviewed questions, as outlined in my video on how to study for exams. This then helped to test my knowledge beyond what I'd pulled out of my own notes, and I would add in additional questions from the past papers and question banks if there was anything that I hadn't covered, adopting a real belt and braces approach so I knew where my knowledge gaps were. Now, in my Sunday newsletter, I've had lots of people replying when I mention this method asking, what do you do if you don't know the answer to one of the questions that you've written? Or how can I not take notes? Well, when doing questions and testing myself, I don't care if I don't know something, and I don't stress about it if I'm just laser focused on getting through as many questions as possible, and creating new questions from anything I don't know and highlighting in red the questions I find difficult so that I can then fill in any gaps. If I do a question and don't know it fully, I'll dive back into the lecture notes or read around the topic and then test myself again. This act of finding information in the lecture notes or a textbook means that I'll be able to see what section the information is in, and I'll see where it fits into the bigger picture around that topic and subject, and be able to access more information in structured slides and books than in any short bullet point notes that I might write myself. We're going to be getting that information in the context of the rest of the subject. And then instead of just reading about the thing we're looking up, we'll also read a little bit more around the topic and understand the subject in a bit more detail, and connect it to other things we're learning. By going back to things like slides and diagrams, you also build up a mental map for where the information is, which for me is a little bit like the method of Loki or using memory palaces to associate facts that you're learning with positions and images. For example, if I've needed to repeatedly go back to a lecture on cardiology and a specific slide when filling in my knowledge gaps on hypertension, I might have gotten used to visualizing that slide and the diagram of the heart pump, which helps me to more quickly recall the information I need. When I recall that information, I'll see the slide and layout and information in my mind, and it helps me to quickly recall those facts. When I was revising for my surgical exams, where there was a ton of information and I needed to learn around my day job as a surgeon, I didn't bother adding in answers, and I just went back to the same resources if I didn't get something right or spotted a gap in my knowledge, which is definitely the most time efficient way to do it. But the most important takeaway is to do what works best for you. With all of these steps, try and optimize for speed rather than adding in extra steps like adding in answers or coloring questions by difficulty. Keep it simple, as with subjects like medicine, there's a lot of information to get through, and so any inefficiency in your process will add up and cost you time in the long run. The question recall framework of creating questions, testing, and then filling in knowledge gaps isn't just for medicine and surgery, and can be applied to any subject, from maths to economics, business studies, languages, and anything. It's just about optimizing for things that might come up in your exam and high-yield topics as outlined in the syllabus. For non-medical subjects where equations or calculations are critical, like chemistry, maths, or physics, when creating your questions, try and focus on the types of equations and the principles and methods behind those calculations, rather than just writing out practice test questions to test yourself on those equations. Focus on understanding the principles and then use worked examples, past papers, and question banks to dive deeper into testing the application of your knowledge. For example, if you're learning about Newton's second law in physics, you might create questions like, what is the equation for Newton's second law of motion? Or what units is acceleration measured in? Or how do you calculate an object's mass? Rather than making up actual calculations to test application of that knowledge, which is best done and faster using past papers and question banks. The way you test yourself and create questions is entirely up to you. And there might be some days when you just want to read around the topic, which is fine too. Remember, the best learning technique is the one that works best for you. If you want to dive more into the evidence behind active recall or how to study for exams, I'll pop up links to those videos in the end cards. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being a subscriber. Do hit subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll catch you again in the next video.